Take a look at the rest of Week 13 and what is at stake. The National Football League took a bye week from the bye weeks. No bye weeks on Thanksgiving weekend. Everybody's got to play football, and we've already seen 6 games, including one on Black Friday on top of it. So let's go to it. Mike Del Tufo, give me some music for it. Let's give me some music for it. It's that time of year. Week 13 in the National Football League. What is at stake for everybody else who is playing? Let's start in Cleveland, Ohio. That's right. The San Francisco 49ers, the last Monday night winner that we saw, taking on the Carolina Panthers. They're 8-4. They're trying to keep pace with the Seahawks in front of them. They're trying to keep pace with the Rams in front of them. They're going to try and keep pace with Shedeur Sanders. His first career home start. Myles Garrett, 18 sacks on the season with 6 games to go, trading his eyes on a guy who had 3 interceptions in 3 series on Monday night, and Brock Purdy. The Niners' last win in Cleveland, Ohio was 1984. It's been a house of horrors for them. Can they go 9-4? Can Shedeur Sanders go 2-0? That's a pretty big game, certainly in the NFC West, and for the Cleveland Browns organization that's trying to catch lightning in a bottle. The AFC South is up for grabs. The Indianapolis Colts
Gabriel had not suffered a concussion, but they went out and they won. How much of that was Shedeur? You know, he completed 11 passes for around 200 yards. His touchdown is like a bubble screen, and one of their many bright young rookies on this team. It was a showcase. Takes that thing to the house. Dylan Sampson showing why he, on top of Quinshon Judkins and Harold Fannin and Carson Schwessinger, who might be the defensive player of the year, and Mason Graham, like they got dudes in this draft class. If one of these quarterbacks even is a thought to be your starter in 2026, it's a massive home run. But credit to Shedeur, he played good enough to win. He had an interception in the game as well. It wasn't like he went out and proved he's an NFL MVP, but he played well enough that it makes sense. Coming home, you're trying to have some juice. We keep talking, Rich, about, hey, the Bengals might be able to make a run. The Bengals and the Browns have the same record. They're both 3-8. They're both 3 games back in the AFC North, which, based upon how Baltimore and Pittsburgh look, I'm not saying it's likely. We all know what the stats and the analytics say. This is like less than 1% chance these teams are going to win it, but they've got a chance. Now, Browns coming home, facing a tough opponent on Sunday. That stadium's going to be rocking, and a big part of that reason is for Shedeur Sanders. Like, you look at it right there.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not over. They're facing a beat-up 49ers team. Let's see what Shedeur can do. I go back to, Rich, just to something we talked about last week, and all the talk of, he's being sabotaged and all this stuff. Let's not, just like I said, let's not overreact to one start, but also there's going to be this narrative that keeps on going, which is basically anything that Shedeur does right is because Shedeur is so great, and anything that goes wrong, it's because Kevin Stefanski's trying to screw him. Give Kevin Stefanski and Tommy Rees credit for building a game plan around Shedeur. They were asking him to do things that he's good at last week, and it's a credit to Shedeur that he went out and he executed those things. He didn't take the deep sacks. He wasn't running around all day and getting himself in trouble. He played on time.
That was picking up a win in his first career start. What will we have in store, though, in a much tougher matchup against the 49ers? As for Brock Purdy, he's looking to bounce back from a 3-interception performance in a Monday night win over the Panthers. And for more, we welcome in CBS Sports NFL writer Tyler Sullivan. And Tyler, we have a fascinating QB matchup on Sunday in Cleveland. Shedeur Sanders making his second career start against Brock Purdy and the 49ers. Now, neither QB set the world on fire last week with their play, although Shedeur was a little bit better than Brock Purdy. So how are you expecting each of them to fare in Week 13?
Well, that's why this is fascinating, right, Chris? Because the fact that you even can say that Shedeur Sanders played better than Brock Purdy last week, that is a sentence that I didn't think would be having at certain points this season, but here we are. And so for me, it's twofold. On the one hand, let's look at Shedeur Sanders. He was good last week. Was he great? Was he lighting the world on fire? No. But was he better than any other Cleveland Browns quarterback we've seen this season? I would say yes. 200 yards around. He had a touchdown, he had an interception. There was at least some explosion in this offense, or some bursts, some excitement in this offense, some life that we haven't seen in quite some time, especially, and that includes with Dylan Gabriel under center. So I'm curious to see how Shedeur Sanders does in this second attempt here when a team like the San Francisco 49ers and Robert Saleh now have a week of game tape on him. How do they attack him? How does Shedeur Sanders adjust? And does that warrant a continued look at him as the starting quarterback for the rest of the season? I would say that that's probably the case regardless at this point. I still, even if they do come on the losing end of things this week, I still would look at Shedeur Sanders for the long term to see what you have before you go into this season. But he's a fascinating subplot of this week 13 slate. And so is Brock Purdy. He hasn't played great so far this season. Yes, the 49ers are having a good record with him as quarterback. They were able to win a week ago, but the interceptions are starting to pile up, going up against a very good Cleveland Browns defense. Curious to see how he plays there.
Yeah, Myles Garrett, he wants to have a field day against Brock Purdy, and so far it doesn't seem like anybody has been able to stop Myles Garrett for the last few weeks. Now in Indy, Daniel Jones leads the Colts against the Texans, despite the fact that he has a fractured fibula. Tyler, this Houston defense, they are no joke. They lead the NFL in total yards allowed per game, and they have one of the best pass rushing duos in the league in Will Anderson and Danielle Hunter. Shane Steichen said all week, right, he's not concerned about his QB and Jones, but are you concerned?
I am, because I'm wondering what Daniel Jones is going to look like in this game against the defense that you said, Chris, is one of the best, if not the best in the NFL. They're registering the best passer rating against quarterbacks in the NFL this league coming into this week. And Daniel Jones, yes, dealing with the injury, and maybe that's part of why over the last 3 weeks or so, he's kind of regressed. You're talking about more turnovers, 7 in those last 3 games than he did the first 8 games of the season. He's had fewer touchdowns over that rate. The passer rating is going down into the 80s over those last 3 games. So you do wonder a little bit, right? Like, is this the Sam Darnold version of 2025? And what I mean by that is, you looked at last year, Sam Darnold took the league by storm, surprised everybody, but kind of turned into a pumpkin in week 18 against the Detroit Lions, and then in that playoff loss to the Los Angeles Rams. And is this a somewhat similar version with Daniel Jones in 2025? That remains to be seen, but you're talking about a quarterback that's trending in a wrong direction, going up against one of, if not the best defenses in the NFL. And oh, by the way, also getting their quarterback back in CJ Stroud. So this is a huge game in the AFC South. The Houston Texans and Indianapolis Colts, this is the first of 2 games that they still have to play down the stretch, and the Texans are only 2 games behind them in the division. So nothing is set in stone yet in the AFC South. And oh, by the way, the Jaguars are still in that conversation as well.
The fact that the Jaguars are still in the conversation based on the way they played this season just tells you about the parity, right, in the NFL this season. Now, it's playoff implications galore in Pittsburgh. The Steelers can create some much-needed AFC North breathing room after the Ravens lost to the Bengals, and the Bills currently sit in the 7th and final playoff spot in the AFC. So how would you describe what's at stake in this matchup, man?
It feels do or die, and obviously we're in week 13. We still have plenty to go down the stretch to determine who's in and who's out of the AFC playoff picture. But you can see it right here, just how close it is. You have the Pittsburgh Steelers clinging to that 4 seed because of the Baltimore Ravens loss. But coming out of last week, they were on the outside looking in on the playoffs because they lost, because the Ravens were able to beat them in terms of their tiebreaker within the division, and they were on the outside looking in on the playoffs. And then you look at the Buffalo Bills, they're clinging to the number 7 seed. So with a loss in this game, potentially, you're talking about them falling out of the playoff picture, especially if the Houston Texans, who we just talked about, if they pull off an upset against Indianapolis, they have a head-to-head tiebreaker over the Buffalo Bills. And so if they lose that game, they lose the Pittsburgh Steelers, you're talking about a lot of head-to-head tiebreakers that they're on the wrong side of going into that wild card positioning. So for both of these teams, whether it's in the AFC North to keep their position in first place or simply strategically lining up head-to-head tiebreakers for the wild card spot, this is as close to a playoff game that we'll find here in week 13.
So much drama to unfold as the rest of the season continues. Tyler Sullivan, always appreciate the insight, man. And here's a look at what's